two young canoeists set out in 1989, their bright boats gliding between the cypress trees of Louisiana's swamps. They never came back. Search parties scoured the bayou, rumors spread, but the couple seemed to vanish into thin air. For 25 years, the case sat in silence until one August morning, when a helicopter patrol spotted something impossible. Two canoes lodged high in the treetops. How did they get there? And what happened to the couple who disappeared without a trace? Bro Bridge woke like a slow lantern along the bayou, the heat coming first, and then the colors. A soft orange worn thin by the humidity that climbed the porches and curled the hair of the women who swept before the sun got brave. The air smelled of cypress bark and wet rope and yesterday's fry oil. And somewhere a radio pushed a zydeco rhythm through a screen door so that the morning seemed to tap its foot even, while the water in the ditches kept its patient face. The town had a way of speaking low, as if afraid to wake something older than itself. Yet everything shone: tin roofs, shrimp nets, the glass of the diner windows, and the herons at Lake Martin lifted off as if they were pages of a book ungluing. At the spine, she moved through this light as if it had always been tailored for her. Mara Baudreau, small and quick, with wrists the color of pecan shells and eyes that kept lists. She carried in her pockets a thumb-worn set of postcards where she wrote names of plants the way some people write prayers: bald cypress, buttonbush, maiden cane, and when she got nervous, she counted in primes under her breath. A private metronome: 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. Her mother taught school, and her grandfather used to say, "In that way bayou men have of saying something twice, so it will stick. That water doesn't forget, and it doesn't rush, it keeps, and one day it returns." She believed him because belief felt like a kind of raft. Tyler Gaspard had the opposite talent. He could make stillness out of trouble. He worked on outboard engines behind his uncle's shop where the smell of gasoline braided with the sweetness of cane, and he whistled the same short line in a minor key whenever thought grew tight, a tune that had no words and didn't need them. He liked keychains from places he had not yet been: Biloxi, Santa Fe, a cracked plastic palm tree for Miami, and when talk got heavy, he answered with homemade puns that were almost good, which was better than good because they made people roll their eyes and smile at the same time. People said he had a mechanic's patience, which is to say he believed most mistakes could be unwound by hands that had learned how to listen. They met the way a current meets a leaf. No ceremony, just the right pull. Tess Sunnier, who would later run the corner market and laugh in a way that made others remember their first bicycles, introduced them at a fish fry in late spring, and by June they moved like a pair of colors through the marsh: yellow and red, two small boats that learned each other's shadow. Tess teased that Mara collected words and Tyler collected sounds, and between the two a person could almost build a house, and perhaps they did, because there is a kind of shelter that is nothing but the promise to go looking at the same time. There is a picture of those months that lives in memory even when there is no paper to hold it. Evenings where the light turned copper and the tea sweated in glasses and the mosquitoes sang that thin hymn of insistence, and the world, which was large, agreed to be the size of 2 paddles and a shoreline of cypress knees. Mara wrote plant names and drew a little heron emblem on the corner, a bird with one wing a little open like a door not fully latched. Tyler whistled and floated jokes downstream. And the town, which had always kept its secrets in a box somewhere under the floorboards, seemed for once to have none at all. 2 days before the date people would learn to remember, they found the boy. Lonnie Fredu, 13 and all elbows, lost in a side channel where the water narrows and the trees lean in as if they are scheming. He had built himself a raft out of sticks and stubbornness, and his bare feet were blue with fear. Mara saw him first, a small worry on the surface, and Tyler bent his weight into the paddle, so their boats came along the boy like a pair of hands cupping water. No speeches, just a rope, a steady voice, a joke about how any good fisherman knows that All good fish wear baseball caps, and the boy's laugh came up like a bubble from deep mud and did not pop. They brought him out the easy way, past the stump that looks like a bishop, past the log where the turtles line up to sun themselves like notes on a staff, all the way to the launch where his uncle waited with a mouth too full of relief to make words. Lonnie turned once before he left, the brim of his hat casting a shadow bigger than his face, and said thank you like he was already older for having said it. It mattered, though no one yet knew how that Saturday came in the habit of Saturdays, with the smell of something frying and someone tuning a guitar on a backstep and dogs learning the news of the street. September 16th, 1989, the last generous breath of summer. They packed like people who had done it 100 times and would do it 100 more. Fruit that tastes like sunshine, a coil of line because Tyler liked to be ready, a small pouch of seeds because Mara liked to know what grew where, and a promise, spoken without being said, that they would turn back before the afternoon got mean. Tess waved them off with a carton of sweet rolls and a warning about thunderheads that like to build castles when no one is watching. The bayou received them. It always did. The water was the color of tea left too long on the stove, clear if seen the right way, and dragonflies stitched silver above it while God down below made slow remarks with their tails. The cypress trunks stood like old men in waders, and Spanish moss hung in long gray sentences that meant nothing and everything. In the shallows, the smell was leaf and iron, and somewhere farther in, beyond what a person can call by name, there was the cold breath of deep places. He whistled his tune. She counted in primes, touching the rim of her boat with her thumb as if the numbers were beads. The world narrowed to the small noises they made, the drip from a paddle lifted too high, the soft tap of hull against a root, the far laugh of a woodpecker who has his own emergencies. They moved toward the bridge people call the one for herons, where the old planks make a music of their own when trucks roll over, and the cross breeze carries a taste of rain even before a drop falls. On one side, a channel the color of secrets led to a place where the map grew hesitant and the trees crowded in shoulder to shoulder. It felt like a library where none of the books wanted to be borrowed. The silence there wasn't empty. It was the full kind, the kind that hides clocks inside it. Mara set her palm to the surface and felt the warm skin of the water and the cooler pulse below, and thought, as she often did, that the bayou was a teacher who never raised its voice. Tyler tried a pun about egrets and regrets that was bad even for him, and she answered with the sort of smile that makes a joke worth failing. Overhead, a cloud walked itself together, the belly of it dark and heavy, and the smell changed the way a room changes when someone opens an old trunk. The wind went from patient to persuasive, the leaves turned their pale undersides to the sky, and somewhere, a line of thunder sounded like furniture dragged across a floor. They should have turned, and perhaps they would have, but love makes people believe they are in concord with the day, and the day, for a while, agreed. They slid under the slow shadow of the bridge. The air was elastic, stretched thin. At the far bank, a splash marked the exit of an alligator who had grown tired of company, and a pair of blue herons took each other's measure and then pretended they had never met. Tyler's whistle tightened, softer now, not fear exactly, but the threat of it. Mara counted 12, which is not prime, corrected herself, 13, and laughed at her own superstition. Then they saw it, high between two trees where no fisherman would cast and no ranger would approve. A line ran taut, dark against the bruised sky, and from it slid boxes the color of someone's idea of honesty, no names painted on their sides, no numbers to belong to. The rig looked like the ghost of old logging gear, a trick of pulleys and stubborn invention, the kind of thing a person builds when he'd rather not be seen from the water. 3 men rowed a flat boat below it, the motor low and mean, one steering, one handling the load, and one with the slow patience of a man who chews and thinks it through. The water around them made that respectful ring it makes around anything it cannot decide about. Tyler's paddle paused in the air and dripped a thin chain of droplets that sounded too loud. Mara breathed in and tasted copper. The first man looked down at a chart or at nothing. The second reached to steady a crate as it passed a limb. The third turned with no hurry at all, the face of someone who has spent a life deciding, and the light found the metal circle at the end of Tyler's paddle, flashed once like a tiny mirror, and that was enough. The man's head lifted fully. His eyes found the yellow and the red where the channel narrowed. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply saw. He kept turning the toothpick with his lips the way some men turn a ring, a small private clock that keeps its own hour. And while the motor muttered and the boxes slid along the dark line strung between trees, he looked at the yellow and the red held still in the narrowing water and decided, without raising his voice or his hand, that these two did not belong to this hour or to this place. The man at the tiller glanced up. The man guiding the crate shifted his stance, and the flatboat angled, not fast, not slow, the kind of movement that says we will come near you and pretend we were always going to do that. Tyler's paddle came down soft and true. Mara felt the skin of her mouth go dry and tasted iron as if a storm had already reached her tongue. And in the small space between them, there was a single breath that held the shape of a choice, forward into trees, or back across open water. That had stopped being kind. The sky pushed the decision. The first drop landed wide and warm, then another with weight, and then the steady unkindness of a rain that wants to be more than rain. Wind dragged its sleeve across the bayou, and the day. Old limbs above them began to speak in wood. They moved to shadow, trying to make themselves small against a curtain of roots, and for 3 seconds it worked. Leaves, water, 2 quiet boats pretending to be part of the scene, till the current, swollen by the sudden rush, took their hulls like a parent takes a child who hesitates at a door and said, "Now," and said, "Here," and the bow of Tyler's red slid cleanly into the sideways pull of the logging cable's wake. He set his weight and tried to turn, but the surface had changed. Language. All the words were push and drag. The cable hummed a thin song, high and angry, and the crate above bumped a limb and went on. The flatboat was nearer than they wanted, the toothpick man watching with the patience of someone who has seen too many things go the way he preferred. "Up," Tyler said in a voice that was every bit of calm he had, and his eyes went to the low forks of the nearest cypress and the way the branches met like hands. Mara did not ask why. She counted in primes because counting slows fear, and primes are islands. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. And while she counted, she looped the short strap that lived in the bow around a jut of bark, fingers quick, and Tyler, with a twist born in workshops and on docks, levered the red to kiss the trunk and rise, the weight of it shifting from water to wood in a long groan. It should not have worked. It worked because need can lend the body a new hinge. Rain came down. In chords. The air smelled of green split open. Mud rose from the bottom as if the lake were exhaling its secrets. They used what the storm offered, the sudden lift of wind, the softened give of bark, and, stroke by patient stroke, raised one boat and then the other into the crook of branches that had not meant to cradle anything, tying what they could tie, doubling knots, testing, trusting, making rough grace out of panic. The flatboat idled below them now, the cable line 3 paddle lengths away, the crates still traveling their private road, and Mara looked at Tyler and saw the look a person gets when he understands that the day will not give everything back, but might give one thing if you ask it right. "Count in primes, love," he said, the small phrase he used when the world tilted, and he whistled that short tune, softer than the rain, and the whistle held their courage together while they left. The boats in the high crooks like lanterns for a sky that might someday notice. Then there were the voices, not yet words, just tone, the shape of someone deciding, and then words, bad ones, and the grind of the motor as the flatboat nosed toward the bank where the narrow, secret channel went darker, as if the water itself had pulled a curtain. They slid from the trunks and into the green tunnel, branches taking their hats and giving them back wet, roots making a map underfoot that could trip a person who did not grow up reading such maps. The sound that drew them forward was small at first, a playful clap-clap as if something inside the trees kept hands, and then steadier, like a pot boiling behind a wall, the sound of water that goes somewhere and then disappears. The old men in town had names for such places, and none of the names meant anything good. Behind them, the motor rose and fell, and a voice tried to know where they had gone. Mara's hand found Tyler's sleeve. He was warm even in the rain. The counting went 14 by accident and then 15 by stubbornness, and then she corrected herself and said 17 and felt better for getting the number right. And still the sound pulled them, a throat in the ground clearing itself, a mouth in stone tasting the storm. The world narrowed to breath and bark and that soft whistle. And when the channel made a left like a secret handshake, they took it without thinking, because bodies learn each other, and they had learned this place in hours when the sun was kind. The canopy drew itself tighter. The light went that bottle green that belongs to aquariums and memories, and the water itself seemed to angle downward as if a hand pressed it there. Tyler said nothing now. Mara said nothing. They let the sound be the rope that does not show. Behind them, the voices were swallowed, whether by distance or by rain or by something older, no one could say. Ahead of them, the bubbling turned to a rushing and then to a hush like breath being held, and then the ground was no longer the ground but a lip. And beyond the lip, there was a dark that smelled of iron and limestone, and the storm, which had owned the air, seemed to stop at that boundary, as if the old rules did not apply. They left behind the kind of noise that keeps people honest, and stepped toward the sound of water that, upon arriving, was not there. The town moved through its hours in the ordinary way, and then not at all. Someone who sells bait hears a story from a man who swears he saw a red hull go wrong in the rain. A cousin of a cousin says the yellow lives now under roots and eats fish like a gar. At the diner, 2 teaspoons rest on saucers that will not know their owners again, and the waitress, who never forgets to refill, puts the pot down and folds both hands under her chin for a full minute. By night, there are boats with lamps, throwing scarves of white across the black water, dogs in jackets standing proud at their prows, men and women who know the smell of mock oranges and the feel of anthills underfoot, all of them calling the same 2 names until the names sound like what a person says when he stubs a toe in the dark. Ezra Hebert goes out first and last and in between, pockets full of peanuts he keeps meaning to eat, and tells everyone to keep heads, not hearts, because hearts will drown you. And then, because he can't help himself, he gets the words wrong on purpose and says, "We leave no stone unturned and no water unwatered." And the volunteers laugh because laughter keeps a person upright. The storm leaves, but the river does not explain. A diver comes up shaking his head and says the bottom moves like a living thing. A pair of boots is found on a sandbar that did not exist the day before and belongs to someone else entirely. A girl from school says she saw them on the highway, pointing west, and a man at the feed store swears the same 2 were in his cousin's bar in Texas 3 summers ago. A sandal is discovered where teenagers go to practice being braver than they are, and for 3 days the sandal is a sermon about fate until the owner limps in to claim it with a blush. People whisper the easy endings because the hard endings are slow, and slowness makes a town invent. Tess keeps opening the drawer where the small black thing sits, metal and leather and a roll of sleep inside it, the little machine that drank light the last day her friends went out. She tells herself she will take the roll to the man who can wake it, and then she closes the drawer because some mercies take their time and some truths are too heavy to lift alone. The days line up and learn how to be weeks. The water forgets the exact angles it held and remembers only the habit of moving. The herons go on with their business, and the bridge sings to the trucks, and the sun, which cannot be taught, shows up whether invited or not. Years are a kind of tide. They come in, they go out, and if a person stands in the same place long enough, she can say she has traveled. The names of the missing acquire a softer edge and then a sharp one when birthdays come around and do their counting without two of the candles. The boy they once pulled from a channel grows into a man whose back remembers the feel of rope and who can tell north from south by the way a tree leans. And when the chance comes to fly above the places that taught him fear and gratitude, he takes it because some debts you pay by keeping watch. He learns the lift of heat off water in late morning, the way wind writes its own small handwriting on grass, the slow carousel of birds that prefer to rise rather than step aside. One late August morning, long after the town has taught itself not to startle at the words maybe and what if, he takes the route that passes over Lake Martin, the way you take the street your childhood house lived on because some habits are prayers you don't know you're saying. The light is the hour's perfect kind, clear but warm, and the cypress tops make a soft green shelf that looks solid from above, though anyone who has ever touched them knows better. He scans because scanning is a way of breathing, and he talks to the creatures below because names make company, and he lets the machines hum sit under the quiet of his own thoughts. And then, where the green is unbroken and should be, he sees two small wrongs that are also rights, two colors that have not belonged to trees in 25 years. A yellow and a red held in the crooks like gifts a child left high and forgot. And for a moment, all the air in his chest tries to go somewhere at once and cannot. The town woke to headlines that tasted like old pennies on the tongue and sugar on the teeth. Bold black letters laid across pictures of trees and sky as if print could pin down weather. Two bright hulls found in the high green. 25 years waiting in the crooks of cypress like stubborn lanterns. And the question passed from porch to porch in voices that tried not to hope too hard. Did the lake give back what it owed? While the lake itself kept its patient face, ripples going where they needed and no farther. The bait shop ran out of coffee by 9. At the diner, someone set down a plate and forgot which table it was meant for. Lonnie, who had seen the colors first from the steady hum of the morning air, kept the story to the measurements a man can trust, but even the facts shone like wet tin, yellow, red, high branches, knots that looked deliberate from above. By noon, a car from the stake rolled in with a woman whose stride translated asphalt into decision. Marla Deschamps eyed the town in quick glances, the leaning telephone poles, the porches that never gave up their chairs, the push of the heat, and she greeted Ezra Hebert with a handshake that said she liked to meet anchors first. He offered peanuts out of habit and mischief, and when she declined, he said, "More for the squirrels of justice," and smiled at his own error as if it were grace. She wrote on the backs of postcards the way some people breathe. She turned over a view of the Huey P. Long Bridge, put the date in the corner like a pin, and under it a small list in a tidy hand, who saw, where, when, wind. Sarcasm lived in her pocket like a pen, but she did not draw it unless the moment required ink. The trees held the boats as carefully as old women hold babies, and getting them down meant asking the pines to share their height. Ropes went up in bright lines. A man in a harness climbed with a patience that made the crowd breathe slower, and the heat, which had looked like smoke all morning. The man in a harness climbed with a patience that made the crowd breathe slower, and the heat, which had looked like smoke all morning, decided to hang around as if to watch. Lonnie stayed near the base of the largest trunk, face lifted, hands on his belt, because hands have to rest somewhere when they cannot be useful. Marla stood a little apart where she could see the angles. She wrote another note on a postcard of a courthouse. Weight distribution, bark scarring, strap placement intentional. Ezra, who had once been thin and now was something softened by time and kindness, kept the radio steady and the jokes small. "We will leave no tree unbarked," he said to no one in particular, and 3 volunteers laughed in relief. The yellow came down first. It moaned the way old wood moans, as if it knew the day had been long and would not be shorter soon. The straps, faded to their ghosts of colors, held then surrendered inch by slow inch, and at last the hull was on the ground where feet can circle and eyes can learn. It smelled like wet rope and sun that had been captive too long. People wanted to touch but did not. Marla crouched without ceremony. Her fingers found what the climber had mentioned, an object stuffed tight under the forward seat. Not heavy, just wrong in the hand, a life vest turned inside out as if it were a pocket pulled in haste. Ezra lifted it with both palms, weighing it the way he weighed fruit at the market stall and felt gravity disagree. "Something in here," he said, and then, because he could not resist, added, "or the air is heavier than usual," and slit the seam with a pocket knife that had opened 1,000 simpler days. A line shivered into the light, transparent at first, then visible where the sun grabbed it. A length of monofilament coiled on itself with modesty, studded along its length with tiny beads and metal slivers that caught and threw back small, shy flashes. Knots lived between the beads in sequences that were not careless. They were the tidy handwriting of hands that believe in order even when the world does not. Ezra fed the line across his palm, slow enough to feel the intention, and lay it on a towel so nothing would tangle what had waited so well. The crowd leaned as a single animal, and the quiet that followed had an edge to it, the electricity of almost. Marla looked at the line the way a librarian looks at a shelf out of order and starts putting titles back where they belong. She had grown near a river that taught her the names of knots as if they were neighbors: clove hitch, figure eight, bowline. Here, the distances between ties repeated the old math of patience. "Not decoration," she said, more to the air than to anyone. Notation. She wrote on a postcard with a picture of a lighthouse she had never seen, knot as direction, bead as warning, metal as measure. Ezra, delighted to be learning, pointed out the alternation of colors: blue, green, red, yellow, and the way certain beads doubled near the tightest clusters. Lonnie found a shallow tray and filled it with lake water so the line could rest without memory wanting to coil. In the clear bath, the beads took on their true faces, the blue gone deep as bottle glass, the green like a leaf held to the sun, the red stubborn and alarming, the yellow bright as a smile people put on when they're not sure. They argued gently with the line until it agreed to tell them. The blue beads appeared where the map of Lake Martin dips and cools. The place is old. Men call steeps where poles go down and don't come back fast. Green marked mouths entrances to thin channels that widen only if the season is in the mood. Red found trouble that walks on two legs and brings engines. A crossing with the shadow of a cable in it, the very one that had hummed its mean little song the day the sky forgot to be kind. Red sat there like a thorn someone had saved. Yellow, less often, named structure roots that lift from the bottom like knees, stumps that will scrape a hull and hold it just long enough to teach a lesson. Between these, the knots fell in that old counting Mara loved when fear came close. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. A breadcrumb trail an animal of numbers could trust not at the end of the line. Instead of a weight, they found a small shell, the ummenelle, color of dusk mixed with milk, polished by fingers or by patience, pierced once and held with a simple sliding knot. Ezra rolled it in his palm, and for a blink the day had the taste of a story told on a back step. "Blue Chapel," he said, and then corrected himself without truly correcting anything. "Know what folks used to call the Blue Cathedral, where the water goes to practice disappearing." The words put a chill into the heat and made people look down, as if the ground might open a polite mouth and explain itself. The radio crackled with approvals and cautions. The second hull, the red, came down with less ceremony, no surprises tucked where hands could reach. Marla collected the postcards she had already used and slid them in order, sealing the day into blocks she could shuffle. She asked Lonnie to sit with the line and write what the beads told him, not because she could not do it herself, but because his eye knew the texture of this place and would not be fooled by coincidence. He named channels by their bad nicknames and traced the path with the clean obstinacy of a person who has been rescued and understands, without getting fancy about it, what rescue wants. Word traveled in its lazy barge and then in a hurry. By evening, the diner had decided the lake was generous again, and the bait shop had a bucket by the register labeled for gas and luck, and people put in folded bills because it felt like a way to walk alongside the ones who did the walking. Someone lit a candle on the handrail at the launch and then another because one candle looks lonely. Someone else said out loud what others were thinking in their quieter rooms. If the boats waited for eyes in the trees, then maybe the rest waited for ears in the ground. They went out after dark because dark is when the swamp shows its other map. Lonnie brought the small machine that hums and listens. Ezra brought the kind of rope that doesn't argue. Marla brought her postcards and a pencil she bit when thinking because habits, too, are tools. A few others whose feet knew which routes would slide joined them and made the kind of party that does not laugh unless it needs to. The line was their teacher. They followed blue toward deeper breath, then green into a tight mouth where the branches matched each other like teeth. The air had that metallic whisper it gets before weather, even on a clear night. As if somewhere above the trees a different day was being arranged. The first red sign was the sound no frog makes. The second was the light that does not belong to stars. The third was the way the water began to carry someone else's impatience. A motor rose from blackness as if the night itself were a lake, and the boat came up through it, and the boat had no numbers to say who it was for, and the man on it had a voice that carried without needing to be mean. He put 2 shots into the air the way a person bangs on a table to end an argument, and the trees took the noise and handed it back smaller, and then the engine settled into a hard, flat note that meant to herd. Ezra eased their bow into the darker dark where only those who have been there can go. Marla did not look away from the line on her knee. Lonnie set his jaw and thought of hands pulling a boy from a narrow place and did not let the memory turn him. The wake of the other boat shouldered in, impatient and bright with threat, and the night took a long breath it did not let out. The dark boat rose out of the water like a thought you don't want to have, engine throwing a flat sheet of sound across the trees, and the night, which had been a bowl for crickets and soft frog bells, became a hallway for metal. The wake shouldered in and slapped the banks, and a pair of young alligators made the quick decision wisdom requires and slipped under with barely a ripple, and the men on the long low deck steered as if herding shadows were their trade, a voice calling something that didn't need words to be understood. Ezra Hebert put 2 fingers on the gunwale the way a man settles a skittish horse and breathed low so the boat would hear it, and Lonnie kept his eyes where the line on his knee told him to look blue to deep, green to mouth, red to trouble, and Marla, who had never met a map she did not try to persuade, let her pencil roll into the pocket of her shirt and held the oar as if it were an argument. She intended to win without raising her voice. They took the left because the left was narrow and ruder, branches gripping its shoulders, roots pushing up like knuckles, and the motor behind them turned the black water gray with its insistence. The bayou moved from patience to calculation. Every bend a choice, every stump a witness, and the air smelled of leaf and hot iron, of storm far off making promises to the nearest counties. The men sent another pair of shots skyward the way a cook hits a pan to bring a kitchen to order, and the noise hopped from bark to bark, smaller each time until it seemed the trees themselves were chewing it down. Ezra aimed them for a slit, so slim even the mosquitoes had to turn sideways. He did not smile until the bow made it in, then he could not help himself. I have never in my long life been chased by folks so optimistic about losing us, he said, and his laugh sounded like something found, not made. The slit became a seam and then a passage, cattails brushing, spider silk drawing white lines. Across faces, cattail down powdering shirts like flour. Lily, surprised at such traffic, pushed aside and then closed behind with the dignity of good curtains. Above, the sky traded its black for dark blue and then for that green that belongs to aquariums and old bottles. and at the last corner Ezra lifted the oar and led the boat coast across a carpet of duckweed into a cavity of quiet, so plain it felt like lying. The engine behind them blared a last insult, then drifted past their hiding with a toothy patience and went on, angry at the maze that changes every year. Certain it would see them again because arrogance is its own kind of compass. They breathed with the boat. Water makes a person humble by making him listen, and they listened until the sounds put themselves back where they should be crickets. A night heron clearing its throat, that soft clop of something falling from a branch and finding home. Lonnie, whose shoulders had learned to write calm for others to read, nodded once at Ezra, and Ezra, having shown off his secret stitch in the swamp's hem, conceded the night back to the swamp and said, quiet as a grandfather tucking in a child, "We will let morning try its hand." They rested in that bowl of dark water until the world turned its face. When first light came, it came softly, like a hand across a table, laying silver along every wet edge and making each cobweb a line from a child's book about constellations. Mist walked low above the surface, and the cypress knees looked like a congregation with their hats in their hands, and as they sorted the colors from the grays, Ezra pushed them into the old corridor that had taught him the difference between stubborn and faithful. The smell of fern and rust, the sweetness of rotting leaves that make the ground a quilt, the slick feel of log under boot. The day introduced its ingredients one by one as if rehearsing a recipe. They beached the bow where roots braided into a little stoop and climbed with the caution that belongs to people who have fallen before. The bark was damp, the moss a whisper, the ants busy with the work that keeps the world together. Marla put her palm flat against an old trunk to steady herself and felt, under the living skin, the stubborn memory of fire, the thin charcoal line where lightning had once written its letter. Lonnie saw it first. Not large, not loud, but true. Heron cut into the soft wood a handspan above the waterline. The wing opened a little the way Mara always drew it, as if a door forgot to close. The cut had rounded with time and weather, a scar more than a wound. Somebody had passed here and said, "This is the way." Marla breathed the smallest yes and then said nothing, because sometimes not speaking is the only way to keep a thing whole. Ezra bowed his head to it like a man who knows a sign when he is given one. The mist touched the carving and turned to pearls and fell, and the ripples those drops made found the hull and told it to wait. Back in town, after coffee that tasted like victory and sleep that barely counted as sleep, Tess Sunnier finally let her hands do the thing her heart had been rehearsing for a quarter of a century. In the small back room where she keeps the extra jars and the multivitamins nobody buys, she kept a tray and a bottle and a routine she had not let herself abandon, as if the act of keeping the ritual alive might keep a door open. The small black roll that had slept like a seed through storms and summers came into the pale red light in the water, and the first images rose as if from another world, soft and sullen and then braver. And Tess put a hand to her sternum when the shape of a cable declared itself and the squares of unmarked boxes hung like quiet moons over the water, their gray skins shining with rain. In one frame, a man had turned halfway toward the sound that is the sound of being seen, and his face, blurred by motion and made human by the weather, carried the calm of people who believe rules are for other rooms. Something small sat between. His teeth the way certainty sits between a person's ideas, thin, pale, a habit, and anybody who had ever bought a radiator hose at the yard off Parish Road would have said his name before they knew they meant to. Elias Kincaid, who owned a field of rust where old machines went to practice dyeing, had spent the late 80s making friends with loopholes. He knew which creeks ran quiet, which deputies preferred not to learn, and how long thunder can mask a motor if you keep your throttle modest. People said he was not cruel, which is a city way of saying he did not waste what he broke. People said he tidied up after his own messes, which is a church way of saying his messes looked like weather after a day. Now he had a face in a print, from a day nobody had wanted to keep, and Marla laid that face beside a stack of papers that smelled of mildew, and old glue in the records room down at the parish, office and began that other kind of chase, the one where the prey is a pattern. She found boxes that had tried to swallow their labels and ledgers where rain had come to visit. She found an inventory stamped in a month with 3 hurricanes and a note that said loss due to flood. And on the next page, a shipment addressed to nobody in particular that never had a receipt. And then a memo about cable permits to pull small loads across an area that did not have official trees. She made lines with her pencil from one number to the next the way a child draws stars into animals. And the animal she drew had a spine made of barrels and a head made of a person who chews wood while thinking. Ezra, who cannot stop himself from speaking a thought when it becomes ripe, said, "If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, then it is a goose of interest." And Lonnie, to his own surprise, laughed so hard his eyes watered and felt lighter for it. The photographs did not lie the way people do. They lied the way weather lies, by moving while you look at it, yet they gave enough. The angle of a pulley threaded between limbs. The sheet of water turned to lace where rain struck it. The bright band along the cheekbone that could only belong to a face turned toward a yellow shape at the edge of its comfort. They laid the prints on brown paper and pressed them flat with law books that have mostly become furniture and let them dry under the ceiling fan that stays too fast even on low. And then they carried copies to the desk of a man whose job is to hate conjecture, and he did his job and still could not ignore what eyes do when they agree across 25 years. By afternoon the air broke, not with storm, but with a dryness that felt like a promise from far away. The sky went that hard, metallic blue that makes a person squint even in shade, and the grass along the ditches began to speak a new language that uses the letter K more than the letter S, and the radio men started to say words like deficit and record and stage. And one of the lake biologists, a woman with freckles like a map of islands, pointed at a chart with a line that had kept itself shy for a decade and said out loud to no one, "Now." The bayou, which prefers to keep secrets in wet places, began to show ankles it hadn't shown since Lonnie's voice had changed. And sandbars the size of small dogs rose to the occasion and pretended they had always lived there. They took the line again and with it coiled in the tray like a tame snake, walked the edges the water gave back, stepping the cracked seams with the care a person gives to old photographs. Blue beads had told them where breath hid under the surface. Now the breath was at their feet, cold coming up through heat. Green beads had named mouths. Now the mouths yawned, toothy with roots. The Huron on the trunk watched them without moving and approved by not objecting. The path bent where the red beads had once warned, and even with the water polite, there was the sense of a thing that had opinions. The line ended where it had always ended, at a small shell the color of dusk in milk, and beyond it the ground made a certain sound when you tapped it with a stick, the hump of hollow under skin in Ezra, whose knees have discussed everything with him before his mind gets there, said gently, "The earth is empty in that spot by design or by stubborn geology." They came to it at the hour when heat is tired of being hot, a roundness in the ground like a mouth thinking about what to say. The edges were clean in a way nature sometimes chooses when it wants to be understood, and a draft came up out of it that did not belong to any weather they knew. It smelled of iron and old leaves and the cool stone of churches, the kind kids dare each other to touch and then don't. Somewhere below, water spoke in a voice that had learned manners from caves. Lonnie put his hand above the opening and felt the exhale the way you might feel the breath of a sleeping animal too large to see. Marla laid a postcard on the dirt and held it down with one fingertip so it wouldn't slide toward the blue, and wrote a single word that did not need translation. Ezra, who cannot stand silence that forgets to be kind, said, "Well, wood. You look at that. The ground has decided to yawn." They stood with ropes they trusted and lights they did not, with a path and beads behind and a new alphabet in stone below, and the day, which had risen like a good idea, now waited like a held breath. The sink in the earth made its small, steady music, and the shape of it matched the old stories so well that even the skeptics felt the respectful itch of a hat wanting to be removed. And there at the lip where dirt turns to cool air, they understood that proof in the daylight is sometimes only the key to a darker door, and that the only way to honor what had been left for them high in the trees was to learn what had been left for them low in the ground. The drought opened the earth the way a tired chest opens at last to a full breath, a long inhale after years of shallow living. Clay pulled tight. Water stepped back with the apology of a friend who has somewhere else to be, and at the bay's edge the ground drew a neat circle as if traced by a deliberate finger, a mouth thinking of speech. Heat pressed a palm over the clearing, but from the opening rose a cool draft that did not belong to noon, a breath from old stone that smelled of iron and leaves that had forgotten they were leaves. They stood around it the way people stand at thresholds, aware that thresholds keep count. Rope came down into the blue of the opening like a sentence written with care. Ezra checked knots the way other men check fences, humming nonsense and swapping a proverb's feet on purpose so fear would have to decide between laughing and staying. And Marla, who trusted lists, measured twice and wrote once on a postcard she would later tuck in her pocket without looking. Lonnie took the line in both hands and felt in the braid a second, quieter braid, the years between one Saturday and this one threaded there as surely as hemp. 25 years ago, 2 small boats had lifted into trees like lanterns for a future eye. 25 years since a boy learned that hands can pull you from a place where your name shrinks. He wrapped the rope around his waist, leaned his weight into it, and felt promise tighten until it felt like part of him. They went down slow because slowness is the only polite way to meet a depth. The top gave green and gold, then the colors folded themselves like laundry, and the world turned to stone and echo. Light from above pooled on the first shelf, a weak coin. Farther in, the walls took the shine and made it a secret. The rock was cool enough to make knuckles honest. Patches had been polished by old water until they wore the silk of bone. Other patches were new and grainy, as if the cave had only just introduced them to air. Every sound arrived with its twin. Drip answered by drip, foot scuff by soft release. Breath answered by what could have been wind or the cave thinking. Even the silence had weight, the kind made of iron filings and patience. On the ledge where the path narrowed, someone long ago had worked to black into the stone, not paint, but charcoal ground and rubbed until it learned to stay. Marla raised one light and the marks leaned out of their sleep, a box with a cross line for pulley, a circle pierced by a line to show direction, arrows that curved around an obstacle and met again, and a bird with its wing opened a measure more than halfway. Ezra touched the edge of the drawing with 2 fingers as if checking a fever and whispered. She signed it, then coughed and said louder, which is to say, "This is the very illustration we were anticipating," and looked pleased to have said it badly. The heron in charcoal, just like the small bird Mara drew on postcards, pointed its open wing toward a tight slot in the rock, where the air felt like a cellar. Beyond that slot, the chamber widened in a way the body feels before the eyes confirm it, the way a room is known by the smell of its tables. The floor dipped toward a dark pool that did not move as much as it listened. On a stone shelf beside that hush lay a circle of metal the size of a palm, the torn lid of some old can, cleaned and kept pocked with deliberate holes. Marla lifted it and held it to the light, and the pattern declared itself to those willing to consider, a small cluster of punctures marking numbers that made sense. If you've lived with storm, a line of holes marching along the edge to show the cable's angle, 2 deeper bites for hour and minute, and 1 long scratch where a hand had hurried. The lid weighed almost nothing, but when Ezra set it down, it thudded in the head like a book closing on a fact. Farther along, tucked in a pocket of stone the way a bird tucks a sugar bead in a mud wall, they found a small wooden spool scarred by teeth or by patience, and wrapped around it, narrow and shy, a second length of line. This one had fewer knots and more small pieces of metal, flattened and pierced. A code built for speed rather than teaching, as if the first trail had been the story and this the table of contents. Blue appeared where the air cooled again. Green at another mouth that now was a memory. Red once at a place where the rock underfoot had sheared and lodged like a broken rib. At the end, tied with a sliding knot that had learned humility, a bead the color of dusk and milk. The same shell, the same insistence. They moved with care, not because the ground argued, but because gratitude asks for careful feet. The chamber led to a lower lip. Beyond that lip, a slope went down to where the pool made a quiet seam. It was there, against the wall where the drops stippled the dust, that the first neat circle of small bones did what bones do, held their shape as best they could, explained themselves without flourish. A coil of rope rested near the hand that had once known how to tie and untie in the dark. The fibers were the kind you make when stores are not near, braided from the stubborn of what you have. The other lay a few spans away, a reach that must have once been a reach across, with a second. Rope looped around the wrist in the manner of someone who refuses to let go of the line that will bring a partner back into light. There was no sign of rage, no breakage that belonged to fists, only the simplicity of a plan the earth did not permit to become a story told at a table. Ezra took off his hat without making a thing of it. Marla did not speak at all. Lonnie was still in a way the body remembers from childhood when teachers told you to hold your breath for a test of something. Time did not stop, but it did that other thing where it sits down and listens. Around the remains, the cave kept its small industry water working the same place 1,200 times an hour, a draft considering a new route. In the dust near the shelf, they noticed a drag mark that spoke of a box slid to its notch. Beside it, charcoal rubbed in the shape of a square, and within the square a simple diagonal with a circle halfway along it, the cable again, married to gravity. Marla stood a long moment looking at the two bodies, the ropes, the lid with its dotted math, and the charcoal that would outlast all of them. And in that long moment, a shape stood up inside the mind and asked to be called by name. They worked back toward day with the deliberate care of people walking home with a sleeping child. The rope bit in and did what rope has promised for as long as people have been falling. At the mouth the heat returned, a familiar mouthful of summer, and the cicadas were louder than they had any right to be. They laid what they had laid, covered what needed covering, and let the sun claim their shoulders. Around them the drought kept its work, but a thin cloud formed over the water as if the lake had remembered something soft. Lonnie set the pouch on a towel the way a person sets bread to rise. Marla wrote one sentence on a postcard and did not read it aloud. Ezra gave each of them a peanut and said, "For strength and symbolism," and looked pleased to have invented a ceremony on the spot. There is a sorrow that thins a person and a sorrow that adds to them. The one they carried up the rope was the adding kind, heavy but useful. The kind that makes a spine understand why it was built. What lay in the pouch, dry against the odds, had weight of another sort, a hinge for a door of years. They did not open it there. Some doors you open with the whole town in the room. Some truths want witnesses and coffee and the quiet at the edges of a long table. They stood while the light made a bright coin on the lip of the earth's mouth and knew the day had changed its shape again. And that night would arrive with more questions, the generous kind dot in the small shade of a cypress, where the old carving of a bird watched without blinking. The wind gave one soft push as if to move the hour along. The line with its beads lay in its tray like a tired snake, satisfied to have led them where it said it would. The lid's holes added up to a minute that the rain had once kept time to. The Huron's charcoal wing stayed a little open, as always, a door held for someone coming behind. And wrapped in plastic, patient as a seed in milk glass, the small roll waited, whole and unhurried, ready to deliver what the stone had guarded when the storm insisted and when the world was not yet listening. They opened the little roll, the tindingambu little roll that's not yet listening. They opened the little roll, the finda. where you open a letter from the past, in a room made kind by low light and careful hands, and the town, which had learned to hold its breath, held it again while the trays did their slow work, and the first gray ghosts came forward to meet the pearl. Day. The images rose with that stubborn bloom old light has, details stepping out of the dark as if they'd been practicing all this time. And there it was, the taut line strung between trees like a taut sentence, the square shapes sliding along it with the rain turning their skins to tin. And below, the flat boat with 3 men riding its wake of certainty and on one frame, turned almost toward the viewer with the patience of a man who believes he is unseeable, a face the parish knew as well as it knew the recipe for a good roux. Jaw working a sliver of wood, eyes half-lidded against weather, Elias Kincaid, young enough to run fast, old enough to think he did not have to. The prints were not perfect. Nothing honest is. Rain had stitched itself across them, the wind had taken a hand in the composition, and yet the truth did not need clean edges to be read. The pulley rig was plain, the path of the cable marked by a blur bright as a finger, and in another frame. A crate caught mid-passage, no markings, no numbers, sliding like a polite lie over water swollen with storm. Marla laid the images beside the punctured lid from the cave and the line with its beads, and the room slowly filled with the shape that emerges when you connect points with more than hope. The small holes in the metal, that constellated arithmetic, gave a date and an hour that matched the meteorology of that hard rain. And in a ledger that had tried to dissolve itself over decades, she found an entry where drums were lost too. A flood that had not visited that yard, numbers heavy with ink, and in another log, the permit for a cable that was not supposed to cross living branches. She wrote with her pencil until the wood was short, the way you write when the words are doing the walking for you. Ezra, who never stands above a thing when he could stand beside it, fetched maps and the memory of men who still remembered which. Deputy in '89 liked his coffee with too much sugar and too few questions, and the pattern put on its hat and went outdoors. The biologist with the freckled face brought water tables that sagged where the month sagged, and Lonnie, who had learned to trust the view from above, traced the line in the prints across the places he knew a boat could not easily go unless a person had help from the air. Tess stood very still, her hand on the counter to feel the wood, and thought of 2 people she loved raising bright hulls into green hands because the sky would someday offer eyes kinder than engines. Kincaid was found at his yard, among rusting machines, a toothpick resting in his mouth, bolts spread like a puzzle. He looked at the cuffs as if measuring them and muttered that time makes fools of photographs and that wood rots where it pleases. He did not resist, but his jaw worked faster. On the splinter of wood, his eyes drifting toward a coil of cable lying like a sleeping snake. The charges were clear illegal transport, dumping, conspiracy, obstruction tied to 2 who never returned. Even the retired sheriff, once loud about water returning all it took, now sat in silence as old complaints resurfaced, folded letters, and ignored reports finally speaking dot at Tessa's shop. 3 prints lay across the counter, the taut cable, the rain-slick box, and Kincaid's unmistakable face. Customers came softly, coins quieter than usual, some leaving flowers, others notes marked only with thanks and the initials M&T. Marla, steady as ever, wrote on a postcard. Water does not give everything back, but it returns what asks for an ending. Ezra closed the story with a clumsy phrase on the radio that made the town laugh through tears. Easing grief's long breath, Lonnie lingered after all had gone, touching the edge of a print as if it were skin. He cried quietly, unashamed, finishing the circle that had begun when 2 strangers pulled him from the water. The town, too, finished its circle less legend than truth, a story to teach. Children learned the names of knots, preachers spoke of love leaving signs in hidden places, and the phrase about water gained its rightful weight. Not all is returned, but what needs an ending will find one dot, and if you look up at the cypress. On a Saturday, with the right wind, You might imagine two bright canoes still resting in their branches, not relics, but beacons, far-off lanterns hung for the future, asking us to look, to remember, and to finish what love began.